The Galactic Concordat had ruled the stars for 11 million years. It was a council of 4,200 species, each one old enough to have forgotten their own beginnings. They had laws for everything: laws for trade, laws for war, laws for which species could live and which species had to die. The most important law was called the doctrine of permissible sentience. It was simple. When a new species reached for the stars, the archivists would watch them. They would study their history. They would measure their violence, their speed of growth, their hunger for power. And then they would decide. Some species were safe. They could join the Concordat. Other species were dangerous. They were called forbidden. And forbidden species had to be destroyed. In 11 million years, the Concordat had destroyed 47 species. They did not enjoy it. They told themselves it was necessary. A dangerous species, left alone, would spread like disease. It would bring war and suffering to the peaceful galaxy. Better to end them early. Better to be safe. When humanity's first probe reached the edge of Concordat space, the archivists were sent to investigate. They were ancient beings, patient and cold, with minds built for judgment. They traveled to the small yellow star called Sol, and they began to watch. For 3 cycles, they observed Earth. They listened to human radio signals. They studied human history. They watched humans kill each other in wars that seemed endless. They watched humans build weapons that could destroy their own world. They watched humans split the atom and walk on their moon within a single lifetime. The archivists ran their calculations. The numbers terrified them. Humans were too fast. Most species took 10,000 years to go from simple tools to space travel. Humans had done it in less than 10,000. They had gone from horses and swords to nuclear weapons in just 200 years. Their growth was not normal. It was explosive. It was wrong. Humans were too violent. They fought wars constantly. They killed millions of their own kind for reasons the archivists could not understand. Land, religion, pride, fear. Humans seemed to need violence the way other species needed air. But the most frightening thing was this. Humans had built weapons capable of ending their own species. They had aimed those weapons at each other, and then they had chosen not to fire. The archivists could not understand this. Were humans wise enough to control their violence, or were they simply waiting for a better target? The archivists returned to the Concordat with their report. They recommended immediate action. Humanity was classified as a Class 7 existential divergence. This was the highest danger rating possible. It meant humanity was not just a threat to their neighbors. They were a threat to the entire galaxy. The Concordat convened in their great chamber, a hollow moon that had served as their meeting place for millions of years. Representatives from thousands of species gathered to hear the verdict. They listened to the archivist report. They saw the images of human wars. They heard the recordings of human weapons. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in 200,000 years, every single species agreed. Mankind was deemed forbidden. The cleansing fleet was assembled, 12,000 warships gathered from across the galaxy. Each ship was ancient, tested in countless battles. Each crew had trained for exactly this purpose. They carried weapons that could crack a planet open like an egg. They carried enough firepower to turn Earth into dust and ash. Fleet Commander was given command. He was old even by Concordat standards, with 4 centuries of service behind him. He had led 6 cleansings before. He knew how they went. The target species would panic. Some would try to fight. Some would try to run. Most would simply wait for death. It was always sad. It was always necessary. The fleet departed with ceremony and prayer. They told themselves they were protectors. They told themselves they were saving the galaxy from a future monster. In 47 years, they would reach Sol. In 47 years, humanity would end. But the Concordat had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. Human technology was primitive, yes. Human ships could barely reach their own moon, but human ears were sharp. Human minds were clever. And somewhere in the vast network of receivers that humans had built to listen to the stars, someone heard the judgment. It was a young scientist named Sarah who first decoded the signal. She worked in a small facility in the mountains, surrounded by equipment designed to search for alien life. She had spent her whole career hopping to find proof that humanity was not alone. Now she had found it, and it was a death sentence. The signal contained everything: the Concordat's judgment, the fleet's departure, the estimated arrival time, everything translated into simple mathematics that any species could understand. The Concordat had not tried to hide it. Why would they? Humanity was primitive. Humanity could not possibly intercept their communications. Humanity could not possibly understand. But humanity did understand. Sarah's hands shook as she read the translation. 47 years. They had 47 years before 12,000 alien warships arrived to kill every man, woman, and child on Earth. 47 years before humanity was erased from existence. She thought about her daughter, only 3 years old, sleeping at home. She thought about all the children on Earth who would grow up under this shadow. She thought about the generations that would never be born. Then she stopped shaking. She picked up the phone. She called her supervisor, and she said the words that would change human history forever. "We have a problem, and we have 47 years to solve it." Within days, the message reached every government on Earth. Within weeks, the world knew. The reaction was chaos at first: panic, denial, anger. Some people refused to believe, some people prayed, some people rioted in the streets. But something else happened too. Something the Concordat had not predicted. Something that had never happened before in human history. Humanity stopped fighting itself. Old enemies looked at each other and saw, for the first time, brothers. Old grudges seemed foolish when extinction waited in the stars. The weapons that had been aimed at neighbors were lowered. The borders that had divided nations began to blur. Because humanity finally understood. They were not Americans or Russians or Chinese. They were not Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. They were not black or white or brown. They were human, and something was coming to kill them all. The Concordat had given humanity 47 years to despair. Instead, humanity would use those years to prepare. They would use those years to build. They would use those years to become something the galaxy had never seen before. The stars had judged them forbidden. The stars had sent a fleet to end them. But humanity had never been good at accepting what others decided for them. The countdown began. On the first day of the new era, Earth went quiet. The radio signals stopped. The television broadcasts ended. The satellites that had filled orbit with noise for 100 years fell silent one by one. To anyone watching from the stars, it looked like humanity had simply given up. It looked like they were waiting to die. The Concordat's long-range sensors detected the change within months. Analysts across the galaxy studied the data and came to the same conclusion. The primitive species had learned of their fate and collapsed. Their society had broken. Their spirit had died. By the time the cleansing fleet arrived, there would be nothing left but ruins and bones. Fleet Commander received the reports with satisfaction. This was how it usually went. Forbidden species rarely had the strength to face their end with dignity. They turned on each other. They destroyed themselves. The fleet would arrive to find the work already half finished. He was wrong, completely and terribly wrong. Humanity had not collapsed. Humanity had gone underground. Every broadcast tower on Earth was dismantled. Every satellite was either destroyed or repurposed for a single task, watching the stars for the enemy fleet. Every factory that had once made cars or phones or toys was rebuilt. Now they made weapons. Now they made ships. Now they made the tools of survival. The world's governments did not simply cooperate. They merged. There was no more America, no more China, no more European Union. There was only the United Earth Council, and it had one purpose: prepare for the war that was coming. Scientists who had spent their careers competing with each other now shared everything. The physicist in Berlin sent her research to the engineer in Tokyo, who sent his results to the mathematician in Lagos. Secrets that had been guarded for generations were opened. Weapons programs that had been hidden from the public were revealed and expanded. And they studied the intercepted signal. Every piece of data the Concordat had sent, every scrap of information about their technology and their ships and their weapons. Human minds tore into that signal like hungry wolves tearing into meat. The first breakthrough came in year 3. A team in Switzerland discovered how the Concordat bent gravity. It was supposed to be impossible according to human physics. It took them 8 months to understand why it was possible after all. Within 2 years, humanity had built its first gravity engine. A ship could now accelerate without fuel. It could turn without inertia. It could move in ways that would have seemed like magic to the generation before. The second breakthrough came in year 7. A team in India figured out how to fold space. Not far at first, not reliably, but the principle was there. By year 15, human ships could jump from Earth to Mars in the time it took to blink. By year 25, they could jump to the outer planets. By year 35, they could jump to other stars. Children were born into the silence. They grew up in underground cities, taught from birth that they were soldiers in a war that had not yet begun. They learned mathematics and physics alongside combat and tactics. They played games that trained them to think like captains and admirals. They never knew a world at peace because peace had ended before they were born. Sarah, who had first decoded the signal, became one of the leaders of the United Earth Council. She was 50 now, her hair, her face lined with years of pressure and fear. But her mind was still sharp. And her daughter, grown into a brilliant engineer, worked beside her. In secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, humanity built its fleet. 700 ships. It was a small number compared to the 12,000 coming to destroy them. But each ship was something new. Each ship carried weapons that did not exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Each ship was crewed by humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The defensive network around Sol was even more impressive. Jupiter's moons were hollowed out and filled with that could launch projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. Saturn's rings were seeded with millions of minds, each one smart enough to tell friend from enemy. Mars was transformed into a fortress world, its surface covered with bunkers and missile batteries. Earth itself was wrapped in a shell of orbital stations, connected by beams of energy that could cut through any armor. Not everyone stayed to fight. The Council understood that they might lose. They had to plan for that too. Generation ships were built and launched toward the galactic rim, carrying frozen embryos and genetic samples and all the knowledge humanity had gathered. If Earth fell, humanity would survive somewhere else. It would take 10,000 years to rebuild, but humans were patient when they needed to be. By year 45, the preparations were complete. The fleet was ready. The defenses were armed. A generation had grown up knowing nothing but the coming war. And then the waiting began. It was the hardest part. The enemy fleet was visible now on long-range sensors, a cloud of 12,000 points of light moving steadily toward Sol, 2 years away, then 1 year, then months. The Council debated whether to send another message. Some wanted to try for peace. Perhaps the Concordat could be convinced to turn back. Perhaps they could be made to understand that humanity was not the monster they feared. Sarah listened to the arguments, then she stood and spoke. "They sent a fleet to kill our children," she said. "They did not ask questions. They did not give warnings. They simply decided we should die and sent weapons to make it happen. These are not beings who will listen to reason. These are beings who have already made their judgment." She looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Old faces and young faces. Scared faces and determined faces. "We will send one message," she said, "but it will not be a plea for mercy. It will be a promise." The transmission was broadcast on every Concordat frequency. It reached the approaching fleet and echoed across the galaxy. It was short. 7 words in the mathematical language the Concordat had used to announce humanity's death sentence. "We know you're coming. We'll be waiting." The silence was over. The war was about to begin. In her quarters on the flagship of the human fleet, Sarah looked at a photograph. Her granddaughter, born in the 32nd year of the silence, now 13 years old. A child of war who had never known anything else. A child who might never grow old. Sarah touched the photograph gently. Then she put on her uniform, straightened her shoulders, and went to the bridge. It was time. Fleet Commander stood on the bridge of his flagship as it emerged from the final jump. Around him, 12,000 warships blinked into existence, filling the space beyond Neptune with enough metal to build a moon. It was the largest military force assembled in 300,000 years. He expected to see a primitive system, a few scattered defenses, perhaps some crude weapons pointed at the sky. Instead, his sensors screamed warnings. "Commander," his second officer said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this." The tactical display came alive with red markers, thousands of them, tens of thousands, weapons platforms on every moon of the outer planets, mining fields drifting in clouds so thick they blocked the stars, ships, strange and angular, moving in formations no Concordat captain had ever seen. "That is not possible," said quietly. He had read the reports. He had seen the projections. Humanity was supposed to be primitive. Humanity was supposed to be broken. Humanity was not supposed to have built a military infrastructure that rivaled some of the Concordat's founding species. "They were watching us," his tactical officer said. "They knew we were coming. They knew exactly when we would arrive." Of course they did. The Concordat had sent the judgment openly, assuming the primitives could not intercept it. They had announced the execution date and expected the victims to simply wait. They had given humanity 47 years of warning. 47 years, and humanity had used every single day. Straightened his shoulders. It did not matter. His fleet still outnumbered the human ships by more than 15-1. His weapons were tested over millions of years. His crews were trained and experienced. The humans had never fought a real space battle. They were builders, not warriors. "All ships advance," he ordered. "Standard cleansing formation. We end this quickly." The Concordat fleet moved forward like a wave of steel. The first engagement happened near the orbit of Uranus, where a human defense station opened fire without warning, expected the shots to bounce harmlessly off his shields. Instead, his forward cruiser exploded. The weapon had bypassed the shields entirely. It had appeared inside the ship, as if the hull meant nothing. 300 crew members died in an instant. Before could react, the human ships attacked. They did not fly like normal ships. They did not follow the rules of physics that every species in the galaxy obeyed. They jumped in and out of normal space, appearing for moments to fire before vanishing again. They accelerated in directions that should have killed their crews. They moved together like a single organism, coordinating so perfectly it seemed impossible. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 300 Concordat ships were destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost 12. Stared at the tactical display in silence. His second officer was speaking, asking for orders, but the words seemed distant. In 4 centuries of service, had never seen anything like this. In the entire history of the Concordat, no cleansing fleet had ever retreated. "Pull back," he said finally. "All ships pull back to the outer system. We need to regroup." The retreat was chaos. Human ships harried them all the way, picking off stragglers, destroying supply vessels. By the time the fleet reached a safe distance, they had lost another 200 ships. Locked himself in his quarters and composed a message to the Concordat High Council. His hands trembled as he wrote. "The forbidden species has exceeded all projections. Their technology is unprecedented. Their tactics are effective beyond any prediction. Request immediate reinforcement. This cleansing will require significantly more resources than anticipated. He did not mention the fear in his chest. He did not mention the look in his officer's eyes. He did not mention the growing feeling that he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. The second engagement came a week later, had adjusted his tactics. He spread his fleet wide, hopping to overwhelm the humans with numbers. He held his heaviest ships in reserve, waiting for the humans to commit before striking. It did not work. The humans had been watching. They had analyzed every move his fleet made. They knew his formation before he finished deploying it. They struck at the weak points with surgical precision, then vanished before his reserves could respond. The third engagement was worse, and the fourth, and the fifth. Each time tried something new. Each time the humans adapted faster than he could adjust. They learned from every battle. They found weaknesses he did not know existed. They fought with a fury that seemed personal, as if every pilot had a family waiting on Earth, counting on them to win. Because they did. Every human pilot had someone to protect. Every human captain had children or parents or friends who would die if they failed. The Concordat fought because they were ordered to. The humans fought because they had no other choice. After 3 months, the cleansing fleet had lost 4,000 ships. They had pushed the defensive line back to the orbit of Jupiter, but the cost was staggering. His flagship was damaged. Half his senior officers were dead. The crews that remained were exhausted and afraid. The reinforcement message came like a gift from the gods. 30,000 ships, the largest fleet in Concordat history. They would arrive in 6 months. Felt hope for the first time since the battle began. Surely 30,000 ships would be enough. Surely the humans could not stand against such overwhelming force. He did not know that the humans had intercepted his reinforcement request. He did not know they were already planning for the larger fleet. He did not know that while he waited, human factories were working day and night, building more ships, more weapons, more defenses. He did not know that humanity had not yet begun to truly fight. On Earth, in a bunker deep beneath the mountains, the United Earth Council watched the battle reports come in. They saw the victories. They saw the losses. They saw the reinforcement fleet approaching. Sarah stood before the council, old now, her health failing after years of stress, but her voice was still strong. 30,000 ships, she said. We cannot defeat them with weapons alone. We need a new strategy. What do you suggest? Someone asked. Sarah smiled, and there was something dangerous in it. Something her granddaughter had inherited, that fierce refusal to accept defeat. We have been fighting their fleet, she said. Now we start fighting their alliance. The Concordat is not one species. It is thousands of species held together by fear and habit. We find the cracks. We speak to the ones who question. We show the galaxy what we really are. The council was silent for a moment. Then one by one they nodded. The war was about to change. The reinforcement fleet arrived like a storm of iron. 30,000 ships filled the outer system, blocking out the stars with their mass. Fleet commander felt relief wash through him as he watched them take position. Finally, they had the numbers to finish this. The combined fleet advanced toward Earth with overwhelming force. The humans fought back at every step. They contested every moon, every asteroid, every piece of empty space, but they were pushed back. Slowly, painfully, the defensive line collapsed. The war settled into a grinding nightmare. Human ships would strike, destroy a few Concordat vessels, then retreat before the fleet could respond. Concordat forces would advance 1,000,000 kilometers, lose 100 ships to traps and ambushes, then advance again. Neither side could deliver a killing blow. Neither side could stop fighting. 3 years passed. The Concordat lost 15,000 ships. The humans lost most of their fleet. But every time the Concordat thought they had won, new human ships would appear. built in hidden factories, crewed by children who had grown up during the war, armed with weapons that seemed to improve with every battle. The defensive line held at the asteroid belt. Mars became a fortress that cost the Concordat 2,000 ships to approach. Earth remained untouched, wrapped in its shell of defensive stations. And then the humans opened a second front. It began with signals, strange transmissions that appeared on networks across the galaxy. They were not military communications. They were stories, images, questions. A video of human children playing in a park, recorded before the silence before the war. A mother holding her baby. An old man teaching his to fish in a river. Simple scenes of a species living its life. Then the questions came. Why were we condemned? What crime did we commit? We had never traveled beyond our own star. We had never harmed any other species. Why did you decide we had to die? Is this the justice the Concordat offers? Death for the crime of existing. The Concordat tried to suppress the transmissions. They blocked frequencies. They punished species who shared the messages. But the humans had spent 47 years studying Concordat communication systems. They knew every weakness, every way to slip past the sensors. The messages spread like fire. On 100 worlds, beings who had accepted the Concordat's authority for millions of years began to ask questions. They remembered their lost colony, destroyed 800,000 years ago because they had been judged too aggressive. They realized they had only barely passed the permissible sentience test. Had they been unlucky, they would have been cleansed too. Species that had never questioned the forbidden doctrine began to see it differently. The humans were not monsters. The videos showed them laughing, loving, building, creating. They were people. Strange people, violent people perhaps, but still people. And the Concordat was trying to kill them all. Cracks appeared in the alliance. Their ships from the fleet, claiming they were needed at home. The representatives began asking uncomfortable questions in the council chamber. A dozen smaller species quietly stopped sending supplies. On the front lines, Fleet Commander watched his coalition crumble. Ships that should have been reinforcements never arrived. Supply lines grew thin. Officers who had served loyally for centuries began to wonder if they were fighting for the right side. The humans sensed the weakness. They pushed harder, not just with weapons but with words. A human ship would disable a Concordat vessel instead of destroying it. Then it would broadcast a message. We do not want to kill you. Your masters sent you to die for their fear. Go home. Tell your families what you have seen. Some Concordat crews surrendered. Some defected. Some simply fled when the human ships appeared. And then humanity did something that shattered the war entirely. They broke through the blockade. It was not an escape. It was not a retreat. 100 human ships punched through the Concordat line and scattered across the galaxy. They carried no weapons. They carried refugees. Humans who had volunteered to leave their home forever, to travel to distant stars and tell their story. The ships landed on neutral worlds. Humans stepped out and spoke to species who had never seen them before. They showed the videos. They answered questions. They proved, simply by existing, that they were not the monsters the Concordat had described. We could have built weapons, a human ambassador said to a gathering of neutral species. We could have tried to destroy the Concordat in revenge. Instead, we came here to talk. We came here to ask why we had to die. We came here to show you who we really are. The effect was devastating. Species that had supported the Concordat for millions of years began to withdraw. Trade agreements were canceled. Military alliances were questioned. The forbidden doctrine, which had been the foundation of galactic law for 11 million years, was suddenly seen as what it truly was, a tool of fear. Back in the Sol system, the war continued, but it was different now. The Concordat fleet was smaller, weakened by desertion and withdrawn support. The humans were tired, their losses mounting. Neither side could win. In the great chamber of the Concordat Council, ancient beings argued with each other for the first time in memory. Some demanded that the war continue at any cost. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to abandon the forbidden doctrine entirely. The Speaker of the Council, an ancient being who had held the position for 300,000 years, finally called for silence. "We have made an error," the speaker said, "not in judging humanity as dangerous. They have proven that they are, but in assuming that danger must be destroyed. Perhaps there are other ways." "They killed thousands of our ships," a military commander shouted. "We tried to kill all of them first," the speaker replied. "Can we truly be surprised that they fought back?" The debate lasted for months. Meanwhile, more species from the Alliance. The fleet in Sol's system grew weaker. Human ships grew bolder, pushing the line back toward the outer planets. Finally, the Council reached a decision. It was not surrender. It was not victory. It was something new. They would negotiate. The message reached Earth on a quiet morning, 51 years after the silence began. Sarah was dying now, her body failing after years of war. But she was awake when her granddaughter brought her the news. "They want to talk," the young woman said. "They want to end the war." Sarah smiled. It was the smile of someone who had given everything, lost everything, and somehow still won. "Then we talk," she said. "But we do not forget. We do not forgive. We simply prove that we are better than they thought we were." She closed her eyes. "Send our best negotiator. Send someone who remembers what we fought for." She took a breath. "Send someone who still believes we can be good." 3 days later, Sarah died. She did not live to see the peace, but she had lived long enough to know it was coming. And that was enough. The peace talks were held on a station built specifically for the occasion. It floated in neutral space, far from Sol, far from any Concordat world. Both sides had agreed to leave their weapons behind. Both sides had agreed to listen. Ambassador Wei arrived on the first human ship. She was 73 years old, born in the first year of the silence, named after the grandmother she had never truly known. She had grown up in bunkers, trained for war, lost her parents in the fighting. Now she was here to end it. The Concordat delegation was led by the speaker, surrounded by representatives of the species that had stayed loyal through the war. They looked at the human woman with expressions that ranged from curiosity to fear to hatred. This small, fragile creature represented a species that had broken their fleet, shattered their alliance, and challenged everything they believed. The negotiations lasted for months. There were arguments. There were accusations. There were moments when both sides walked away, certain that peace was impossible. But Wei was patient. She had inherited her grandmother's stubbornness, her mother's wisdom, her father's calm. She listened to the Concordat's fears. She acknowledged their losses. She did not apologize for humanity's survival, but she did not gloat either. Slowly, an agreement took shape. The Concordat would withdraw from Sol's system. Humanity would be free. The forbidden doctrine would be suspended. There would be no punishment, no revenge, no reparations. The war would simply end. Some on both sides were furious. Concordat commanders who had lost ships and crews demanded justice. Human veterans who had lost families demanded payment. But Wei held firm. "We did not fight this war for revenge," she told the human delegation. "We fought to survive. We have survived. That is enough." The treaty was signed on the anniversary of the silence, 52 years after humanity had learned of its death sentence. The Concordat fleet, the human ship, stood down. For the first time in 5 decades, there was peace. Wei requested one final opportunity. She wanted to address the full Concordat Council. The speaker agreed. She stood alone in the great chamber, a single human woman facing the representatives of thousands of species. The chamber was vast beyond imagination, built to hold beings of every size and shape. Wei felt very small. But she did not feel afraid. "You called us forbidden," she began. You sent your fleets to murder our children in their cribs. You gave us 47 years to prepare because you assumed we would spend them in despair. You thought we would break. You thought we would surrender. You thought we would prove that you were right to fear us." She paused, looking around the chamber. Some of the beings could not meet her eyes. "You were wrong about us, but that is not why I am here today." She took a step forward, her voice growing stronger. "I am here because you were wrong about yourselves. Your concordat was built on fear, fear of anything different, fear of anything that might challenge your comfortable certainties. You called it wisdom, you called it preservation, but it was only ever cowardice dressed in ancient law." The chamber was silent. No one interrupted, no one dared. "For 11 million years, you have destroyed species you judged too dangerous to live. You told yourselves it was necessary. You told yourselves it was mercy. But it was murder, plain and simple. You murdered 47 species because you were afraid of what they might become." Wei's voice did not waver. "Humanity will not seek revenge. We will not demand payment for what you tried to do. We will not become the monsters you feared." She smiled then, and there was something fierce in it, something unbroken, something that had survived 5 decades of war and emerged stronger. "Instead, we will do something far worse. We will prove by our existence and our choices that your doctrine was always a lie, that the galaxy is vast enough for all of us. That difference is not danger." She turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "You deemed us forbidden. The cosmos responded too slowly to save you from your mistake. Your fleet took 47 years to reach us, and we used every day. But perhaps," she said softly, "the cosmos responded just in time to save you from yourselves." She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the silence stretched for a very long time. 200 years passed. The galaxy changed. The Concordat still existed, but it was different now. The forbidden doctrine was abolished. New species were welcomed instead of judged. The old fears remained, but they no longer controlled everything. Humanity spread across the stars, not as conquerors, not as rulers, as neighbors. They built colonies and stations. They traded and explored. They made friends with species who had once tried to destroy them. And they remembered. Every human child learned the story of the silence, of the war, of the woman who had spoken to the council. They learned that survival was not enough, that victory was not enough, that the true measure of a species was not how well it fought, but how well it chose not to fight. On a station at the edge of human space, a teacher named Maria stood before a class of children. Half of them were human. Half were, their scaled faces curious and bright. They had grown up together, played together, learned together. The war was ancient history to them. The hatred was a story from books. One of the children raised her hand. "Teacher," she said, "why did the Concordat try to destroy humanity? They seem nice to me." Maria smiled. She thought of her grandmother who had lived through the war. She thought of the stories passed down through generations. She thought of the choice humanity had made, again and again, to be better than their enemies had feared. "They were afraid," Maria said simply. "When people are afraid, they sometimes do terrible things. The Concordat was afraid of what humanity might become. They thought the only answer was to destroy us before we could destroy them." "But humanity didn't destroy them," the child said. "No, we didn't." "Why not?" Maria looked at the children, human and alien together, and felt something warm in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or pride, or simply love for what the galaxy had become. "Because the best way to prove someone wrong about you is to refuse to become what they feared. The Concordat thought we were monsters, so we chose to be kind. They thought we would bring destruction, so we chose to build." She walked to the window. Outside, ships from a dozen species drifted past. Human ships, ships, a fleet but not a war fleet, a trade convoy, a sign of peace. "Being good is harder than being strong," Maria said. It always is, but the hard things are usually the ones worth doing. The children thought about this. Some of them nodded, some of them looked confused, but they would remember. They would carry the lesson forward. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the stars turned slowly, indifferent and eternal, witness to the small beings who had learned at last to share their light. The war was over, the hatred was fading, and humanity, that species once deemed too dangerous to exist, had become something the galaxy had never expected. A beacon, a friend, a proof that even in the darkest times, even when facing extinction, even when every voice in the cosmos cried out for blood and revenge, it was possible to choose something better. It was possible to choose hope. The story ended there, but the future stretched on forever, full of possibilities that no one could predict. And in that future, humans and aliens would walk together, learn together, grow together. Because that was what humanity had fought for, not victory, not survival. A chance.